Hi, and welcome back to another episode of DSC's Charity Questions. My name is George Knight, and I'm your host. And today we're here talking about AI with Helen Olszowska, the MD, Managing Director, and founder of the Seashell Collective. So, welcome to the podcast, Helen.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here.
Amazing. So, you're talking about AI in the charity sector. How have you ended up in this position, Helen?
So, yeah, I'm not an AI expert. So, apologies to anyone tuning in who was hoping to hear from one. But the reason I talk about AI a lot, either in sort of speaking engagements or when I'm writing for Charity Digital, really goes back to when I was working at Human Rights Watch. I was their UK Associate Director for Development and Outreach. And I was lucky enough to be there when they were developing their technology and rights division. So they were talking a lot about how emerging technology could benefit their work, could really help with sort of digital investigations of rights violations, but also how technology can be party to rights violations in and of itself.
Mm,
So it was a really fascinating time, and I got to be in a lot of behind the scenes conversations with people who were very involved in the tech industry or deeply knowledgeable about rights. And then I left to go freelance and start Seashell Collective, doing sort of content marketing in the sector.
nice.
And I lost all of that fascinating information.
Yeah.
So I carried on with my own reading. And it really occurred to me that the rest of the sector wasn't talking about emerging technology. They weren't talking about AI very much and what the impact of it was likely to be on our work in the sector. And I
Mm,
felt that that was really critical. So when I started writing for Charity Digital, I actively pitched a lot of articles about emerging technology and AI to really try and pass on some of the things that I'd learned, speak to people who were engaging with these technologies, and pass on those learnings to the sector. And it's something that I feel really passionate about and have continued to do.
nice. I mean, there's a massive opportunity, right, to save time and effort, and I think it's only going to grow, isn't it? So, currently, though, what do you see in terms of AI use in the charity sector?
So it's really interesting. And I think in the Charity Digital Skills report,
Mm,
Zoe Amar and her team often
yeah.
talk about and identify the potential for the charity sector to lag behind the
Mm,
commercial sector when it comes to digital adoption. And I think in the 2023 report, they did a special section on AI use, and 27% of charities said they were already using AI, and 26% said they weren't, but they were planning to.
okay.
And when you contrast that with the commercial sector, there was a government report into AI activity in the UK, in UK businesses, and 68% of large businesses in the UK said they were using AI
Mm,
already,
mm,
33% of medium, only 15% of small. But I mean,
okay.
when you think about that comparison, you can already see that potential for there being a digital divide
Mm,
between commercial organisations and charity sector organisations. And for the survival of the sector and the
mm.
continuation of the work that we do for sort of communities, I think we need to be really aware of that and thinking about how we can kind of keep pace with commercial organisations, but not sort of using AI for AI's sake.
Yeah, that keep pace, isn't it? And I would be interested to see what the big charities come out as a percentage there. I mean, is there anything that stands out to you as a reason why we might be lagging behind? It's maybe a non-obvious answer, is there?
Yeah, I think I often come back to this sort of the way that charities are constructed, the way that we're
Mm,
constructed as a sector, and rightly so in some ways, is that we're set up to be risk averse. You know, our sort of
okay.
trustee boards,
Mm,
the sort of their reason for being is to assess risk and make sure that charitable money is being spent in a responsible way. And when it comes to things like emerging technologies like AI,
mm,
don't even AI experts don't fully understand the risks of the technology
yeah.
because of this the way that algorithms work.
Mm,
Um, they know what the algorithms do, but they don't exactly know how they do it, which is this kind of black box concept.
yeah.
And so how do you when you're set up as an organization to act in a responsible way and
Mm.
respond to your board's questions around risk, how do you approach using a technology where the risks aren't fully understood?
I think that's very true, isn't it? The way that there is just less opportunity for risk taking. I think that makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? Why we've kind of in that little bit of a lag potentially.
Absolutely. And I think it's always down to resource as well.
True.
Charities also try to operate on a level of resource that is responsible. And we
Mm,
seem to be in the overhead conversation very much
mm,
at the moment, again, after the sort of podcast with Simon Sinek and Scott Harrison from Charity Water that people are talking about a lot.
yeah.
But, because of that low level of resource, people are stretched in their roles.
Mm,
When I worked in house in charities for 15 years, it was very hard for me to carve out additional time to look
mm,
into something like an
mm,
emerging technology, unless it was a core part of my role, and test it out and pilot it and assess risks and work out what a risk framework might look like. So I
mm.
think that's also contributing.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's well said. So I mean, I love Grammarly, but we're not going to talk about Grammarly. Maybe you are. Have you got any specific examples of where a charity or maybe someone you've worked with have implemented AI, and what was the tool, and what happened?
Sort of specific tools that have had a big impact in
Mm,
charities. And actually, the article that I've written about, one of them has just come out today on Charity Digital, that is around predictive AI. So
yeah.
we've talked a lot about generative AI in the sector, I think, and people sort of, I think, have a broad understanding of what that is. Tools like ChatGPT that use large language models in order to generate an output based on a prompt.
Nice.
But there's also kind of a subsection of AI called predictive AI,
Mm,
where you're using an AI algorithm to look at big quantities of data and analyze that data to identify patterns, which is a big part of what
mm,
AI does, and use those patterns to predict future behavior.
mm.
So this is increasingly being used in fundraising.
Yep.
So looking at the because charities often have a vast history of data on
Yeah.
donor behaviour,
Mm,
which is very difficult to analyse using sort of existing tools or historic tools. But there are new tools in the market that will use sort of predictive AI, so use an AI algorithm that connects to your CRM via an API,
nice.
so that it can look directly at that data and analyze it and identify those patterns of donor behavior and
Mm,
predict how you could better segment and target that database depending on the type of fundraising activity. So I interviewed Dataro, who were one of the organizations doing this, and also looked at sort of, predictive AI in general. What is it? What are the risks? How can it be used?
mm.
And Dataro had worked with pancreatic cancer
Yep.
UK on an end of year appeal in 2022, and using the sort of predictive AI, they were able to identify a segment of 65% fewer donors that raised 111% increase on net income from the previous year, and also made a saving of more than 12k on their direct mail cost.
And so is that maybe looking at developing a donor into a major donor through that system potentially? That sounds like that what's kind of happened.
So this tool particularly will help to identify. So that wasn't particularly doing that particular
Okay.
appeal.
Okay.
But the tool itself can identify whether someone, because that's one of the kind of areas of friction, isn't
Mm,
it, in fundraising between
mm,
sort of individual giving and major giving.
mm.
Where are you kind of drawing the line? Where do you start to draw someone from your individual giving program into your major donor
Exactly.
program? And this tool helps to predict that based on previous giving behavior.
Wow. And so that was a consultancy organization. You call them Datara, was that?
Dataro, yeah.
Yeah. And so are they a non-profit? Are they profit driven?
I don't know the company makeup. You'd have to
Direct.
have a look.
Direct.
They were started by three co-founders in Australia, and
Cool.
they first kind of tested the tool back in 2018 with Greenpeace Australia, and
Cool.
they basically kind of challenged them to come up with, because when you're developing an end of year appeal, for example, you will
Mm,
look at your database, you'll go through it in fine detail, do lots of kind of segmenting
mm,
manually between sort of the database manager, the individual giving manager, and various others kind of involved, and you'll then carry out your appeal based on your final sort of segment. So they had the charity do that, and Dataro also did that using their tool, and I think it was, I'd have to check the article, but I think it was something like 142% more effective
yeah,
with the predictive AI. So I think
that's
there's
amazing.
I think there's significant kind of opportunity
Yeah,
with tools like that, and there are lots of other ways that AI is being used within charities,
let's do it.
in very different ways.
Let's go into it. I mean, that was a great example, and I think that'll be interesting. Maybe our listeners will jump into your interview actually. I'm sure you'll give them an opportunity to find that at the end, when we talk about jumping off. But yeah, I mean, other benefits. Let's go for it. Well, where else are we seeing AI in the charity world?
So, other benefits. I mean, I think there are a few ways that AI is being used. So, I spoke to a few people last year just to find out, because I feel like 2023 was the year we were talking about AI, and we were talking about generative AI particularly.
Mm,
So I
definitely.
wanted to find out how were people already using it,
Mm,
and what kind of came back is that people were mainly using it in fundraising.
mm,
So I spoke to Diane Hall at Evolve 3. She's a consultant who helps charities with their grants applications, and she was using AI, generative AI, in a really interesting way, to try and solve the issue that charities have when they're trying to apply for grants for a particular project,
mm,
and they might apply to a number of funders, but each funder has a different application form. They have
mm.
different kind of requirements. They have different word counts, and there's a huge amount of work, which I've written about in sort of other articles as well. The
Cool.
sort of admin of grants fundraising, of
Mm,
grants fundraising, and she was using generative AI to take the core information from the organization, from the charity, and change it into the different formats that were
mm,
needed.
mm.
Yeah, using ChatGPT or other sort of generative AI large language model tools, and so it was acting as a huge time saver. So I think there's
Yeah.
some great examples of how it's being used. It is also being used, I think, on the sort of service delivery side of things, but more the examples that I found have been more about kind of AI enhancement, and I think
Mm,
we're seeing that a lot this year. I mean, I work in marketing mainly, and I think most of the tools that I use now have some kind of AI enhancement. Whether it's
mm.
kind of a social media scheduler that
Yeah,
will allow you to kind of auto generate captions or responses,
it's true. Yeah.
and there are a number of charities who have call center models that use AI led chatbots to
Mm,
sort of preempt a call. So when someone calls their helpline, the chatbot will go through some questions with them, um,
mm,
and before they're actually transferred through to a call center operator. So it's not necessarily having the tool do the entire task
exactly.
for you, but it's
Yeah.
that idea of kind of AI enhancement to sort of either speed up or triage. Or actually, in the case of call centers, there's an interesting use case that younger generations are less comfortable with phone conversations. So actually, that kind of disclosure of information is
Mm,
actually more comfortable over a kind of text-based correspondence. So it actually kind of helps when they do speak to someone, so with someone who's kind of a trained counselor, for
mm,
example, that
mm,
they've been able to kind of disclose some of the what they wanted to kind of disclose in the conversation in that kind of
mm.
text-based way, and sort of been able, the answers will help that expert to triage their response.
That's very shrewd. I can imagine that. I can completely imagine that.
Mm,
We see it also with people potentially talking to ChatGPT as a therapist. Not necessarily the best example, but people are
yeah.
able to be more open with these tools. So we're hearing that, aren't we? It's maybe a great opportunity there to, as you say, triage and then potentially have that bouncing off platform to have a human jump in.
definitely. And it is, that human oversight is so
Mm,
important,
mm,
because there are a number of risks with, AI tools that we have to be really aware of, particularly when those tools are, potentially accessing the data and personal information of the communities that we serve as charities.
yeah. So I don't have a question here about risk. And I think maybe it's worth just thinking about this. So I want to talk about how we can develop these skills internally and future trends. But risk, I mean, yeah, data. Is there anything else that stands out straight away, Helen, as something that you're mindful of when you're working with charities?
Yeah, I think data privacy is going to be the
Mm,
big one.
hmm.
When we are using a tool, whether it's kind of predictive AI or generative AI, there are a number of ways that data, we're supplying data to
Yeah,
that tool,
absolutely.
and we have to be mindful of what's being supplied,
Mm,
and how it's going to be used. So I actually just read Machine Readable Me by Zara Rahman, which I
mm,
recommend for charities. It's a short read. She's an activist and a sort of data expert. So she's done a lot of, she describes them as kind of context driven projects for data use within the nonprofit sector, particularly in the humanitarian sector. And she talks about um, when we are supplying personal data and
mm,
why,
hmm, hmm.
and how that data will then be used. So, for example, with Dataro, they talk about sort of the depersonalization of data.
Yeah.
So we're thinking about personal data in line with GDPR,
Mm,
and the kind of rules and regulations that exist there, and kind of not supplying that personal data. And there are sort of specific aspects of our personal data that are specified in under GDPR that we have to think very carefully about how and when we sort of supply them. But uh, we or that data can be depersonalized, but there are still elements of data that aren't seen as personal, like postcode, for example, that
mm,
could still produce bias in the tool, because we know
yeah.
that there often is a demographic relationship to postcode as well. So it's
Mm,
thinking through, when we're
okay.
supplying data, what are we supplying and how could that be interpreted? How could bias creep in based on that data? And also, what is going to happen as a result of that data? Because it's going to be put through an algorithm, and the algorithm is going to identify patterns, make recommendations as a result. But when that
Mm,
happens, we are opening up pathways for some people and we're shutting them down for other people. So what Zara Rahman goes on to talk about is the idea of sort of self-determination and the right of self-determination, and the question that around how are artificial intelligence technologies shaping our our identity, our choices, our ability to
mm,
self-determine within society and kind of access our economic and social rights. So there's
mm,
some really interesting questions that I think we need to be asking alongside um, embracing these technologies and making sure that we are keeping up with the way that they're being used in the world, in the commercial sector, and so that we're kind of benefiting the communities we serve without putting them at undue risk, and particularly their data.
wow. Yeah, I like that. And it might sound overwhelming, I think. And this is why you're here, Helen, and why you do so much amazing work. And I think we can already tell how much you've written about this and spoken about this. And I'm sure our listeners will be jumping onto the Seashell Collective after this. So let's say some of our listeners are sat there thinking, well, we've got a little bit of opportunity. Maybe we've got a little bit of resource. How would you recommend they go about building this capacity internally to start incorporating AI?
Yeah, so I think there's some really interesting ideas around what skills could be really useful for people looking to either explore this themselves, explore using AI themselves, or for organizations looking to kind of embrace AI within their sort of day to day.
Mm.
There's some obvious ones. So you're going to be looking to people who understand data, who
Mm.
you might find already within your organization, within IT, looking
Mm.
after your CRM, but
Yeah.
also people like marketers and fundraisers. We have to think about data quite extensively, and we have to have a good understanding about how it works and how we're kind of drawing data into the organization and sort of then retaining it and using it.
Nice.
And you might also find those skills in sort of your operations
Yeah.
side, particularly if you're serving large communities. So, like in the humanitarian sector, for example. But I came across something really interesting the other day. The chief AI architect at NYU Stern, who's called Connor Grennan, and
Mm.
he says that the kind of future of coding is actually around natural language, because we're using large language models so
Yeah.
much now. So actually, it's people who really understand how language works and operates, and who know how to ask questions of humans to
Yep.
elicit kind of the answer that they want, and get the information that they need. Chat GPT and other sort of generative AI tools have been trained to respond like humans in
Mm.
language form. So actually, if you have those sort of language skills, actually that can also be really useful. And I think empathy is also really important there as
Mm.
well, because I think in order to be able to um, talk to someone and get the answers from them that you're looking for, you have to understand their perspective, um, and be able to ask a question with their perspective in mind. So I
Mm.
think empathy is really important as well, and inclusion,
So true.
because one of the things that we know, particularly around generative AI tools like Bard and others, bias crops up,
What was that tool?
particularly
Sorry. Sorry, just to interrupt. What was that tool called again?
Bard,
Bard. Cool. Cool.
Google's Bard, yeah.
Yeah.
And obviously there's Microsoft Copilot and
Yeah.
many others that are kind of using generative AI as their basis.
Yeah.
And we know that bias is happening, and
Absolutely.
we know that bias is probably coming from the bias in the original data set that they were trained on, because these tools are trained on massive amounts of data
Mm.
that are drawn from various places, and within that data there is existing bias,
Mm.
because of how it's been collected, because of who's created it, because of the categories that it's been created under, and that bias comes out in the results, and we've particularly seen bias around race.
Mm.
So I think having the skills of people who can ask, how could this result from this generative AI tool that we've used potentially be biased against people of color, for example,
Yeah.
or people with disabilities, because we know with technologies, the vast majority of them aren't developed with people with disabilities in mind.
Mm.
People who can be asking those critical questions,
Mm.
from the perspective of those communities, will be really valuable, I think, in using AI going forward. And I would highly recommend, if you're interested in understanding bias in generative AI and other kind of areas of
Yeah.
AI, Dr. Joy Boylan-Winnie, who has just written Unmasking AI. She
Mm.
was doing her master's at MIT, and started a project where she basically discovered that that facial recognition technologies, and one of the sort of technologies that had been used as a basis for a number of tools around the world, was unable to recognize her face as a dark-skinned black woman,
Mm.
and it led her into kind of trying to understand how bias was kind of creeping into these tools based on the way that they were trained, and the outputs that they were creating. And she's absolutely fascinating in this area. So I think if you're interested in learning more, then I definitely recommend her book, or the Algorithmic Justice League, which she runs.
Wow. So it was called the Unmasking AI.
I'm
Um,
asking AI. Yeah.
Lovely. Yeah, no, some really good recommendations, Helen. And I think just to kind of summarize there, you said inclusivity, you said empathy, and my brain has lost it. The first one I think was
I mean, data skills, which you'd
language
expect,
skills, wasn't it? Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
That was it.
data
Yeah.
skills, language skills, and
Yeah.
inclusion skills. I think
Yeah.
all of a combination of those is going to be really important to sort of adopt AI in a way that sort of drives your
Mm.
goals forward, but with kind of an ethical overlay that is really kind of thoughtful about risk.
Absolutely. You said that and it instantly was like a light bulb, like obviously for me, but at the same time it wasn't something I was initially thinking. I'm thinking of a programmer, something like that. But you're right, actually. It's more the psychology element actually of
Mm.
AI, isn't it? And that is going to be a difficult thing to talk about. I mean, we could probably go down a route and think about self-driving cars and all of this stuff, but we won't. But the psychology will play a massive role. So bringing it back to the charity sector then, or keeping and staying in the charity sector, I should say. Emerging trends for AI. What are you seeing and what are some maybe larger charities using, smaller charities using? What are you seeing?
So, I mean, I think I've touched on it already, but I do think that predictive AI is going to be massive. So, I think it's starting to have an impact on fundraising already,
Yeah.
and people are starting to kind of test out these tools to better kind of target sections of their database for particular types of fundraising.
Mm.
Um, but I think, and obviously we don't know how AI is going to evolve and how the use cases are going to evolve. But in my kind of opinion and my personal interest, I think the same kind of predictive approach is going to be used in marketing a lot more. So obviously, when you're running kind of integrated marketing campaigns, your ideal scenario is that you're going to be able to target the same audience group with the same key message in a number of different formats across a number of different digital channels.
Mm.
And there's some interesting examples already in e-commerce where AI is being used to integrate those channels much more effectively. Again, looking at using sort of predictive AI in the sort of CRM, but using that to inform how how people are targeted on different digital channels and combining automation as well.
Yeah.
So your marketing becomes a lot more personalized, and that should make it more cost effective. And I'm really interested to see how that can be used in charities. I mean, obviously in fundraising, but
Mm.
also in education. So that one of the my other interests is the level of sort of misinformation, particularly because I do a lot of work in social media. There's a
Yeah.
huge amount of misinformation out there, and I think charities have a really critical role as educators,
Mm.
and in sort of dispelling misinformation and improving the quality of our infosphere.
Mm.
And I think having access to sort of predictive AI and technologies that allow you to integrate different digital channels and put out those kind of messages that are around education, around a particular area of expertise for a charity, could be really, really valuable.
Oh wow, I think that's really nice. Yeah, and it's almost like in lieu of critical thinking as well, because
Mm,
arguably there's a route to think about this, but it's so easy to take things at face value actually, and we can help contribute to the positive side of it by also putting things at face value, but the right information. I think that sounds like a really sensible approach. I like that a lot. Uh,
absolutely. And I think I would also say that one of the things I really took away from Zara Rahman's book was not to use AI led technologies just because you can.
mm,
Like, just because you can use AI for something, should you?
mm,
So I think it's about asking that critical question as well.
exactly.
Maybe it would be incredibly useful for a marketing campaign that's around a particular area of health education, for example. But actually, maybe there would be better methods to do that depending on the communities that you're trying to reach. So I think it's always just having that critical question in mind: is this the right use case for predictive AI or generative AI or whatever other
Mm.
technology you're considering?
Yeah, I like that. So the decision not to choose something is important as the decision to choose something, and
Absolutely.
if charities are taking the decision to choose AI and they pick the right tool, what
Yeah.
do you think that right tool could be? Maybe I could say what any untapped opportunities or areas you think that the AI will make a big difference in the charitable world.
I think one of the things that we haven't talked about is resource and
Yeah,
well-being within the charity
yeah.
sector. So for me, and actually it's one of the things that came up when I spoke to Tim Todhunter, the
Mhm,
head of public fundraising at Crohn's and Colitis, and he was talking about how they'd used generative AI at various stages of appeal development. And one of the things he kept coming back to, which I wholeheartedly agree with, is any tool that can help to save time and resource and
mm,
reduce the risk of burnout is really valuable in the sector. It's a huge issue for us, and I've seen it in organization after organization and experienced it myself. You know,
mm,
we stretch ourselves to our limits because we care,
mm,
and because there isn't a huge resource to deliver the work, and tools that can help to save time, and either grant time back to people working within the sector who are kind of overusing and overextending themselves for very good reasons, is wonderful, and tools that can help to open up time for learning, for embracing new technologies, can only be helpful as well.
I completely agree, and I mean Crohn's and colitis, autoimmune, that is can be stress related as well. So they obviously have
Mm,
an even greater need to represent how we can
absolutely.
save people productivity challenges, and poor productivity is directly linked to mental health as well. So I'm all for it, Helen, and I think the future is going to be bright. And now ultimately I don't know if it will mean we'll all be sitting in the office eating biscuits with our feet up. That's not the nature of the work we do with the robots out there saving us. It won't be. It will be very much human led, I believe, and we
Yeah.
rely on Helen on people like yourself. And just for a listener's benefit, I'm sure I'll get you to give an intro to the Seashell Collective. But Helen does a wonderful newsletter talking about AI tools and giving it her own experience of using them. And so, even if you're not considering it, I would very much tell you and very much suggest that you go and Google the Seashell Collective, and sign up to the newsletter because it's incredibly insightful and there's a lot of information there. So maybe I've done a little bit for you, Helen, but
Oh,
is there
thank you
any?
very much. I haven't paid him, by the way.
No, not at all. I'm a nerd. I love the AI stuff. I love what Helen's doing. So the Seashell Collective. What's the best way to get onto the Seashell Collective, Helen?
Yeah, so we are at seashellcollective.com.
Yeah,
I'm the managing director, and we are a group of digital experts who help charities to turn strangers into supporters, campaigners, volunteers, whatever you'd like them to be,
nice.
using sort of digital and content marketing. So I do that as the day job. My newsletter is Tech Experiments,
Oh,
and
sorry. Okay. Yes.
yeah, yeah. Newsletters, tech experiments, and it basically tests a new tool, sometimes AI, sometimes other tool, each week, to see how it works, kind of rate it based on various criteria, so that you don't have to. Because I mean, who has time to be testing out all of these new tools that are coming out all the time? And there's always 6 or 7 or 1,000 options for each sort of type of tool. So I try to take that work out of the equation for people through tech experiments. And I also write for Charity Digital.
Nice.
So you'll find a lot of the blogs also on my site, but on Charity Digital as well, where I'm writing a lot about AI and other emerging technologies.
Perfect. And so social media. Do you prefer LinkedIn, X, or wherever do you like people to follow you?
At the moment, I have left X.
Me too.
I still have a presence on there, and I still do occasionally sort of manage X accounts for clients, but
Okay.
I took the decision to leave a little while ago. So you'll find me personally on LinkedIn, and that's the best place to sort of keep up with me. I talk about AI and content marketing and the charity sector in general on there. So I'd love to connect with you.
Perfect. That's Helen Olszowska, Olszowska. Amazing. Thank you so much, Helen. And just from DSC's perspective, Helen is also joining us to deliver an AI course. And she's also written an article for us as well. But as you've heard from this podcast, there's lots of written content out there by Helen. And I think there's a few jumping off points, isn't there? A couple of books as well. I wrote one of them down, which was the was it Raman? Zoe Raman, the machine
Yeah,
readable me.
Zara Rahman,
Zara, sorry, yeah.
Machine Readable Me. So for anyone watching,
Oh, yeah, yeah, we've got it. Cool,
or you can't
cool.
quite get it in focus.
Machine
Machine
readable me.
Readable Me by Zara Rahman. But I'd also recommend Unmasking AI by Dr. Joy Boylamwini,
There we go.
which is, yeah, really fantastic. And yeah, I'd love to see people on the course. We're going to be looking at sort of the story of AI, because I think sometimes to understand the technology, you have to understand its history, its kind of past, present, and future. We're going to be looking in more detail at some practical case studies, particularly around generative AI, but also predictive AI. We're going to be having a good old discussion about AI and how it could be used in charities,
Mm.
because obviously this is an emerging area. We don't necessarily know, we don't have a comprehensive idea of what all the kind of use cases are, so we're going to have a good old discussion about that. And we're also going to get practical as well, so if you've been wary about actually trying any of the sort of generative AI tools particularly, we're going to talk about how to do that, how to get the best out of them.
Amazing, amazing. Sounds good. So yes, it's in May. Whenever you're listening to this, though, you can get on the website and see when we've got Helen back in for another date as well. Helen, anything else you wanted to say to the listeners while we've got you here?
Oh.
Put you on the spot.
Yeah.
Some
um
profound sentence about AI, maybe. No.
which I think, oh, I tell you what, I'm gonna leave you with something, actually, because we both read this, I think, haven't we, the Rutger Bergman Utopia for Realists.
Yes, let's do it.
Yeah, so just to give you a sense of, and I may just scare everyone now, I don't mean to, but just to give you a sense of how critical this is and how much AI is likely to change things for all of us
Mm,
over the next sort of 20 years. We're seeing this process called the great decoupling, where productivity is at record levels because of technologies like generative AI, and innovation is really fast, but we're
mm,
seeing falling median income and fewer jobs. And
mm.
Rutger Bergen talks about this kind of hollowing out of the middle class, which you will have heard in
Yeah, yeah.
the news as well. That we're seeing greater kind of economic disparity between the highest and sort of lowest earners. And Oxford University estimates that 54% of all jobs in Europe are at a high risk of being usurped by machines in the next 20 years. So, if you're retiring in a couple of years, maybe don't worry about it. But,
Yeah.
if you're like me, going to be around for a while, AI is something that should be on your radar.
Mm,
So thinking about how you can use it, how it
mm,
can be used in your role, how you can be that human oversight for AI, because that will be needed. There's unlikely to be a time when that is not needed.
mm,
But if you understand how the technology works, how you want it to help improve the way things work within your role, how you can help to mitigate those risks that come with AI technologies, that is going to be a huge benefit to you in your career in the next 20 years. These are predictions; they're not necessarily the truth, but it's really important that we're all aware of these technologies and the scale of the change that could
mm.
happen as a result of them.
Helen, amazing. That was profound. That was an incredible way to leave
I
it.
don't. I just hope I haven't scared anyone, because we don't need to be scared. We just need to think about it and get involved.
Exactly, exactly. I like that a lot. Helen, thank you so much for joining us. And yeah, I mean, you're joining the DSC associate team. We've got you now, and we're looking
Trapped.
forward to, yeah, exactly. Yeah, we've got you, and we're looking forward to sharing your knowledge with the wider sector, as like you're already doing, Helen. So I really appreciate your time, and thank you to the listeners as well for tuning in to this session on AI.
Thank you so much for having me today. It's been really great to have this conversation with you. And if there are any questions that come up that haven't been answered in the podcast, I'm always happy to answer them on LinkedIn, or send them to George, and he can send them on to me. We'll work it out.
Nice. That sounds good. We can do that. Absolutely. Thank you, Helen, for offering that.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching Charity Questions by the Directory of Social Change. So this is the podcast where we bring charity experts to you and we ask them the questions that you provide us via social media. So if you want to get involved, please check out the Directory of Social Change on Instagram, Twitter or LinkedIn. And of course, to hear more about this content and to learn more about Charity Questions, subscribe to our YouTube channel now and of course like this video to let us know if you enjoyed it. Thank you very much for watching. Cheers.